Okay, I am Kate Heald. I am the College and Career Advisor at Bethesda Chevy Chase High School. However, because these events are on Zoom, we do share this information with all of our 25 high schools across the board, which is why you were invited here tonight. And if you do not know, like I said, if you don't know who your college and career advisor is or what we do, we help you figure out what you are going to do once you leave your high school. So I encourage you, especially if you are now a junior, because we're finishing up with seniors, to seek out that person and get a head start on what's coming for college or career or gap year, whatever it is you decide to do. So I'm going to turn off my camera because I'm going to monitor the chat and I'm going to continue to let people in. And I'm going to let Jordan take over. Thank you.
Now I get to talk, my favorite part. Hi, folks. I am Jordan Kanarek. I am the founder of Kanarek Consulting, partner of CollegeWise, and a frequent speaker here across the board for MCPS. I did this very same webinar last night for Richard Montgomery and some others who joined, and now I get to chat with all of you about college research. As Ms. Heald mentioned, for those who are just joining, we will be sharing the slides out after. We will be recording this. And on top of that, if you have questions as we go, please don't hesitate to throw them in the chat. Ms. Heald will be monitoring them. She'll throw them my way, and I will be pausing throughout to answer said questions. That in mind, let's dig in to the plan this evening. We are here to talk about college research. What is going on in the world of admissions is where we will begin. We will then move into best ways to research how to build a balanced list and some tips and resources I always recommend. But let's start more broadly for a moment. I've seen that there's a lot of juniors in the waiting room, in the room with us this evening. To the person who asked, can we please start the entry notifications? We've already tried twice. It is not allowing us, so please do bear with us. We do apologize. The juniors in the room, it is about to be second semester. You may have already started building a list. You may just be here tonight to talk about what that even means. But if there's one piece of advice I can give this evening over everything else, it's start doing visits now. You don't have to fly to California and go see the UCs tomorrow and spend $2,000 round trip. You can do visits locally. But the most important thing is that you start to see what campuses look like, big, small, rural, urban, and start to understand what's available to you. Because the sooner you do that, the easier it will be for you to build a list. So juniors, even sophomores on this call, no harm in starting that now. Really quick, while I am going to talk about other things, I think it's important that I do talk about myself a little bit. My name is Jordan Kanarek, founder of Kanarek Consulting, partner of CollegeWise. I have been a college counselor now for nearly 10 years. Prior to my time as a college counselor, I spent my time at the Princeton Review, director of counseling there, director of tutoring, helping build that business in DC. But I always liked the counseling side. In fact, I was a CollegeWise student when I was your age. So after college, I went and got my certification in counseling, opened up an office in the Rockville Town Center, very close to the East Dumpling House, and I worked with 7 kids that first year. Fast forward 9 years, I helped run the division of counseling at CollegeWise, and I now work with students across 5 different time zones, 3 different countries, and I get to do this with you tonight because, quite frankly, I really like what I do. But we are not here to talk about me. I can talk more about me later if you'd like. Let's talk about the world of admissions right now. Do I like sharing slides like this? No, I don't, because I think it creates a certain level of stress that I don't like to bring into this. But I do think it is important that you know the reality and the information. And so that is why we are going to start here. You will notice that there are 2 different bar graphs here. The one on the left is from 2000, the one on the right from 2023. The big difference here is the schools in those graphs. You will notice that right now, it is harder to get into Boston University than it was to get into Harvard 23 years ago. Why? There's a number of reasons, but quite frankly, more applications, more people applying to the same schools, and more people going early decision. Those are the 3 main factors that are driving this. Now, does that mean that you have to go ED to get into a highly selective school? No, you may not. Depends on the student. But it is important that you understand that the rise in applications means that there are more schools than ever before that now have 20% admit rates, 10% admit rates. And I get the question all the time, well, why? Why is BU that much harder? Is it that much better than Harvard was 20 years ago? No, it's not. BU is a great school, but it's not that it's gotten better. It's that more people are applying to more colleges. As soon as COVID hit, we saw a big change in the number of applications people threw out there. The fear of, where am I going to go? Am I comfortable going away from home? And the consumer, people applying to college, have only applied to more and more schools since then. I know students who have made the decision to apply to 18 to 20 colleges each year. To me, that's an asinine number. It doesn't make sense. You can only go to one. Why pay $1,500 just in application fees just to see if I can get into another reach school here or there? It's not my call to make. It is your decision. But quite frankly, spending that sort of money and having it impact the quality of the work, because each of them has a number of essays, isn't something I recommend. But at the end of the day, that is what is driving these admit rates down. The other thing to consider here is that colleges are changing what they're looking for because of these numbers. 5 to 7 years ago, you would have seen that a student with a 3.6 unweighted GPA from RM, from WJ, from BCC, from a number of MCPS schools would have gotten into the University of Maryland outside of the engineering program or comp sci. That same kid this past cycle, last 2 cycles, they didn't get it. In fact, they were flat out denied by their in-state institution that a few years ago they would have gotten into. People think it's solely because of the GPA. People think that it's because maybe there's an issue with the essay. But the real reason is institutional priorities. UMD took a look and said, over the past 5-ish years, these schools in Bethesda, Potomac, Rockville, so on, where they might consider it to be more affluent areas, these very schools were shunning them. Students were getting in, but then choosing to go to UVA, Rice, Northwestern, Harvard, UCLA, so on. So Maryland said, no, this doesn't help us. If we keep taking these students and they don't choose us, that impacts our yield, the percentage of accepted students who end up coming to our school. So what did they do? They still took kids from those schools, but they focused a lot more on students who came from MCPS schools a bit further north, from students who are much more likely to take the in-state opportunity because of the price rather than looking at prestige. Their institutional priority pushed them to focus more on yield and less on the student who came from a school with X GPA. Another school whose institutional priorities shifted pretty crazily, the University of South Carolina. A few years ago, USC took dozens of students I knew and just gave them full rides, basically, because they wanted to attract more kids from the Mid-Atlantic. Well, USC had a law passed by the state recently, just a year ago. The University of South Carolina now needs to take the top 5% of every public school in their state. So all of a sudden, a school that usually teetered on the 55% in-state, 45% out-of-state, now has closer to a 65 to 70% in-state population. So all of a sudden, getting to USC got that much harder. Why? Because of institutional priorities. Institutional priorities aren't always shared out. Ones like these in-state policies like they have, or like the University of Texas Austin has, those are shared out. But do you think Maryland said their institutional priority? That they weren't going to take as many kids from some of the more affluent areas of the state? Of course not. If they said that, you wouldn't apply. And they don't want their numbers to go down. The important thing to know is that there are aspects of this process you're going to know, and there's aspects you're only going to learn after the fact. And that is only making this a more stressful process. The numbers in front of you show exactly what has happened over the last couple of years. Colleges have more data, and they're being very smart with the data that they're using. They now know just who they should take and how many to get their ideal yield. Why does yield matter? Great question. The higher your yield, the more it impacts your ranking. And for some reason, we seem to think that the US News World Rankings has any sort of meaning at all. And because we think that, as a consumer, they're going to continue to feed into it. And so all of a sudden, you have schools like Northeastern here, which was one of my favorites to point out, who in 2 years' time reduced the students they accepted by more than half. And they got their number. Why? The data showed them how to do it. And number two, I mentioned it before, but early decision. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what early decision is, it is a binding contract stating that if you get into this institution, you are going to go. You'll withdraw all your other applications. You are going to X school. Now, not every school offers ED. UCLA only offers regular decision. USC at the top only offers early action. Harvard offers restrictive early action, meaning you can't apply anywhere ED and you can't apply to any private schools EA. They do that. Princeton does. Notre Dame, some highly selectives. There's a lot of nuances in there. But ED is allowing schools like Tulane and Northeastern to fill up 60+% of their class before they even get to early action or regular decision. So a few years ago, Tulane, EA, wasn't too bad. It was around a 12, 13% admit rate. Northeastern, closer to 15. Both schools are stating that they're expecting their EA and RD acceptance rates this cycle to be below 5%. That's how many applicants they get there and how much they've already accepted in early decision. Here's the truth, folks. There are only about 40 colleges, closer to 50 this cycle, that have a 20% or few or less acceptance rate. And quite frankly, there's way more schools that accept more than 50% of the kids who apply. So my next charge to each one of you is to stop focusing on prestige. If you don't believe me, that's okay. You've only known me for all 15 minutes. But if you don't believe me, watch Malcolm Gladwell's Zeitgeist. Type it into YouTube, save it for after this, sit down and watch it. He will show you data point by data point how the name of the school you go to does not have an impact on what happens after. It is all about where you finish within your class, what you take advantage of while you're at that school. The top 2% at Northern Oklahoma University are going to have potentially a better job than a student who finishes in even the top 20% at a Harvard. Why? Because that student at Harvard is striving to try and get to the very top, but they're getting beaten out by other students, despite the many different opportunities. That student who's number 1 at Northern Oklahoma, number 3 at Northern Oklahoma, has had every opportunity, has a high GPA, had plenty of time to study for the GMAT, and is now going to UPenn Wharton Business School because of that. So my charge to you, focus on fit. It is the college-wise mentality. This is what we've been preaching for 25 years. I said Malcolm Gladwell Zeitgeist, Zeitgeist. My German is bad, but it's Malcolm Gladwell Zeitgeist. Oh, thank you, Julie, for posting it. But college-wise has for many years focused on fit. We even have a book out there called Finding the Right Fit for You, with a U for university, because we're clever like that. But the point is, if you focus on fit, there's a number of advantages. You're almost certainly going to have more options. You're going to have more money being offered to you and greater control over this process. I shared this last night because I think it's a very powerful example. But a few years ago, I worked with a young man from Whitman, a very strong applicant, right after COVID, the year of 2021. He made the decision that he was going to focus on prestige. He agreed to apply to UMD in Wisconsin because he liked the programs, but the other 18 schools he applied to were all highly selective institutions. He ended up getting into 2 of those 18 highly selective institutions. USC, Southern California, who had an 11% admit rate, and Emory, who in regular decision was around 12%. 2 very good schools. But do you think he was excited? No, he felt pigeonholed. I have these 2 options. Out of those others that I applied to, like only these 2 accepted me. He even started asking, could they be good? If 16 other schools said no, could these 2 even be that good? And he got in his own head and he had a very tough time through this, despite getting into 2 schools that many people would be excited about. Why? Because he didn't focus on the fit. He focused on the name and he was pigeonholed into these options. So folks, I strongly encourage you to focus on fit. Even at the uber selective, let's use the examples of Dartmouth and UPenn. These are 2 very different institutions. One is in Hanover, New Hampshire. One's in downtown Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. One of them is a quarter the size of the other. And one of them is a lot more focused on an inclusive environment where students work together. Whereas at the other, UPenn, you're going to find that it's a lot more competitive than the former. You have Dartmouth and UPenn that couldn't be more different in many of their ways. but students still think, oh, well, I should just apply to both because they're Ivies. The more you think of it from that perspective, the harder this process will be on you, especially since both those schools in regular decision have below a 5% admit rate. So you know the truth. You know what I'm going to preach tonight. If that is not for you, I totally understand. If you're here to learn about what I need to do to get into Harvard, that's not tonight's conversation. We do that at another time. It's called the highly selective college conversation. Ms. Heald and I will plan that later. Tonight, we are talking about building a college list, doing research, and so on. But where do we start? There's 4,000 plus institutions across the nation that are accredited four-year universities. How do you start to parse through them? So, does it sound like a broken record? We start by finding the right fit for you. Many of you live in the Montgomery County area. Your high school might be 45 minutes from downtown DC, 20 minutes, 2 hours due to traffic. Thanks a lot. But you know what you like and dislike about where you live. My question to you here, quite frankly, is do you like where you live? Is this the sort of place that you would want to be? Do you want to go to college for 4 years in a similar environment? And don't just consider it from where, consider it from the size of your school. I went to a big public high school in Southern California and I ended up at Gettysburg College. One of the most common things people asked me was, why? Why'd you leave California for here? It's because it's what I wanted. I wanted the seasons. I wanted a small school where I could be a big fish in a small pond. I wanted access to great poli-sci and history programs. And I wanted to be in the middle of nowhere so I wasn't distracted by the city because, quite frankly, I probably wouldn't have graduated if I was in the middle of the city. That's what I needed. You now need to ask yourself these same things. And so the big five revolve around size, the location and distance from home, what it is that you want to study in college, what is a family we're comfortable with price-wise, and whether or not you're willing to let go of that prestige. So I'm going to pause for a moment before we dig into these. There are 100 plus people on here. I want to give people a chance to ask any questions that are coming to mind so far. I'm going to take a sip of water. I'm going to wait 15 seconds, see what comes across the chat, and then we'll continue on. This is that uncomfortable moment. Usually if I'm in the crowd, I can see you point out, but I will wait. What tools should you use to search for colleges? Not just how to pick them, but how do you find them at all? We are going to cover that. That is a promise. It is a very fair question, but I'm not going to jump there just yet. Anything else? And yes, I know that that ringing is annoying, folks. I apologize. It is not allowing us to turn it off. We've tried a couple of times now, so I appreciate you bearing with us on that. Okay. Why doesn't major matter? Let's say if you already know what you want to study. Great question. How do I know the details about the colleges and if they fit? We keep hearing that we should select a major that is not that popular. All good questions, and we're about to cover them, so I'm glad that you're asking them. One question I will address before we move forward. How do I know the details about the colleges and if they fit? Quite frankly, the only way to know that is if you're willing to spend a little time on a college campus right now. You can ask these very questions, evaluate yourself, compare your current environment to what you want, right? But if you don't step foot on a college campus, you can't tell if it's somewhere you'd feel comfortable, if you'd feel at home. Go. You are an hour away from a number of colleges: UMD, AU, GW, Georgetown, George Mason University, UMBC, Johns Hopkins, and Washington College just a little bit further, but a tiny little liberal arts college on the Eastern Shore. You have 8 colleges I just mentioned right there that you can do visits to. You go a little bit further, you can go ahead and you can see Gettysburg College, my alma mater. You can see Dickinson, 30 minutes away. Heck, go to Philadelphia for a weekend and see UPenn, see Villanova right outside, Drexel, Haverford, Swarthmore. I could go on. But my point is, get on campuses to know. And to the person asking, do you need to schedule a tour for those colleges or can you just show up? I would try and schedule a tour. Why not? Why not hear from a student about what they like about their school? And you'll want to do that a couple weeks in advance. Okay. So a lot of good questions. We're going to cover them now. There are a number of different institutions out there just based on size alone. Some students decide that they want to be in the big house at Michigan and they want to watch with almost 100,000 other fans. And some people would get agita over the idea of even being in a stadium with 100 people or don't care about sports at all. So ask yourself the $1 million question. Do I like the size of my high school? Would I rather go somewhere far bigger with people I may never see again just walking by me in class? Ask yourself, if you were in a class of 400 people in your freshman year seminar for Business 101, are you going to show up and do what you need to? Because your professor is not going to know your name. They're going to be able to teach well. Their TA might be teaching part of the time, and you might wait in line for 45 minutes at office hours to talk to a TA just to ask one question and move on. Are you ready for that? If you're like me, you weren't. At Gettysburg, my anthropology teacher, I didn't even know I was in the class, by the way, my freshman year, knocked on my door the third day of school and asked me if I was okay. And I said, yeah, why? Who are you? She goes, I'm your anthropology teacher. You miss my class one more time, you can't get higher than a C minus. You better believe I kicked myself into gear, and that's what I needed to be successful. Size matters both in the classroom and in the student body. Are you comfortable having to walk 35 minutes across campus to get to your class, or do you want everything a bit more compact? Those are questions worth asking around size. And if you don't know, the beauty of it is University of Maryland is right around the corner. Go do an official visit, walk that campus, get a feel for what it's like in College Park. You want another option? Go to George Mason University on the other side of the river. It's about a 40-minute drive from you. Or hop in the car as a family and go to another part of the country that you want to visit. Maybe go to Boston and see Northeastern, MIT, Harvard, Tufts, BU, BC, 6 great schools, all very different in size and sort of proximity in the city. There's a lot of options out there. And that's why I said at the beginning of this, don't wait until the end of junior year to start doing visits. Doing visits over summer isn't all that helpful. There's no one on campus. It's hard to get a sense of the student body. Sports aren't going on. I know that's hard to do during the school year, but between spring break, some of the vacations we have coming up in 3-day weekends, try and see some stuff if you can. That brings in the location. For some people, going more than an hour away from home might feel really far. Some people might be exceptionally close to their family, used to taking care of grandma or siblings, might not want to be more than an hour or two drive away because they don't know how to do the laundry or they miss mom's cooking or dad's cooking, right? Okay, there's a number of schools to consider. Some people love the idea of not being anywhere near home so that parents can't drop in on them so they can see a new part of the country. You have to decide what is important to you there. I can't help you decide that. Only you can. Some people say, for me, it's no more than a 6-hour drive. That still leaves hundreds of institutions. For some people, it's I need to be more than a 6-hour drive away. I have to get on a plane. Thousands of institutions. But ask yourself, what is it that you'd feel comfortable with? One of my favorite questions to ask is, it's mom's birthday and you want to surprise her. It's your sibling's birthday and you want to surprise them. How comfortable are you having to have a layover? How comfortable are you with having to kind of spend 6 hours flying home, a 30-minute Uber back from DCA or BWI to be home for 36 hours before you turn around and do it again? And the other thing to consider is the cost. Sure, you can plan it out, but if there's a family emergency to fly back from Oregon, University of Oregon to the DC area, that's going to cost a pretty penny. How comfortable are you with that cost? These are questions I strongly encourage you to answer. And these are the specific ones that I think are worth addressing. Do you like the Bethesda area? Do you like the Gaithersburg, Germantown area? Do you like, if you're coming from another part of the country and on this call, do you like where you live? Do you want to be surrounded with people like the ones who are at your school right now? Or do you like the idea of a different sort of student body? How close to home? Are you comfortable being in the middle of nowhere? And if you can't answer those right now, it's worth starting to learn how, seeing some schools. This brings us to a question I'm seeing a lot of in the chat around major. Somebody mentioned in the chat that they already know what they want to study. So why wouldn't they let that be a factor? You can absolutely let that be a factor, but it should not be the driving factor. Unless, of course, you know you want nursing, chemical engineering, something that's so specific that only a handful of colleges really have strong programs for it. I can understand why that might be a focus. But some of the most popular answers I get right now are mechanical engineering, business, psychology, biology. There's thousands of schools with those majors. So if you allow major to be the driving force, that whole thing around prestige goes out the window. You're going to type into Google best colleges for biology. You're going to see Johns Hopkins. You're going to see a number of highly selective schools, and you're going to decide right there that those have to be the ones because it's bio. Well, I'm going to pick on somebody. Somebody go ahead and throw their major in the chat for me. I'm curious. Dance. Great answer. Dance programs are plentiful, as are performing arts, but if there's a certain aspect of it that you're seeking, such as classical or something along those lines, you want to make sure that the program there is available to you. So dance and performing arts, those absolutely should be something you consider. Is the program there strong? One of the things I'll push back on with dance and performing arts, unless you are planning to do that as a major and to go to New York City or Boston or to Toronto, one of these cities that has a giant dance program troupe, and try out for that and make that be the starving artist, what else are you going to study alongside of it? Do you want to maybe learn about psychology or business as well? Think about the other avenues that you may want to add on outside of the performing art. I'm seeing things like sports management, speech pathology or OT, engineering, biochem. Oh, there we go. I love the answer pre-med. What is the most popular major that medical schools are admitting from undergrad right now? Go ahead and make a guess. Art, good guess. Bio, nope. Pre-med's not a major. Psychology, another good guess. There it is. English. English is currently one of the most popular majors alongside music. So going back to the art, English and music are two of the most popular majors right now. People are like, how's that possible? Doctors, why would doctors need that? Well, because quite frankly, these sorts of majors, it's easier to maintain a strong GPA. And strong GPA in your major is one of the most important factors to med schools. Doesn't matter what major it is, strong GPA matters. Number two is the MCAT, the SAT basically of med schools. Well, there's 6 different sections. There's bio, there's OChem, there's GChem, there's verbal, there's psych, there's there's one other that is eluding me at the moment, physics. So even if you're a bio major, you still have to study for the other 5, and you're already inundated with all the work because you're a bio major. But it doesn't matter what your major is there, you're spending hundreds of hours. There we go. And on top of that, opportunities afforded to you. Well, if you're part of a pre-med advisory at Harvard onto Western Kentucky University, those opportunities will be available. So to the people who said pre-med, 10 schools have a pre-med major. Most schools will have a pre-med advisory, where no matter your major, you can be a part of that advisory, and you would be able to, through that advisory, get those opportunities. So all of a sudden, who cares if it's bio? Focus on where you can be successful and which school is going to help you matriculate to pre-med programs. Don't focus on the major. So to answer the question, even if you think you're going to be a bio major, half the kids end up leaving bio because it's too hard. Even if you think you're going to be an aerospace engineering major, well, quite frankly, a lot of programs require you to go into general engineering before you even go into aerospace. Oh, and a lot of people leave engineering once they realize it's Calc 1, 2, and 3, and they don't like the math. Then you have economics, a great major, but a lot of people who want business at a school but think they might be below the mark will go for economics, making it that much harder to get in at some institutions. Stop thinking about the major and focus on what you want from your school. If you like the idea of being able to study business to econ to psychology, do they have all 3? Good. Start there. Because end of the day, you thinking that it's about the major is the very reason that people focus on the ranking. If you can remove that, for example, I have a student who's at Wichita State right now. Wichita State, yes, that's in Wichita, Kansas. She's an aerospace engineering major, and she's absolutely crushing it. Already has an internship lined up with a very large contracting firm there. Why? Because she's working really hard. She's one of the top in her class. And on top of that, she's found a place where she can be successful. I don't think she would have been as successful if she ended up going to a highly competitive school where she's being compared to everyone else. So my point is, major should be a factor, and you should think about it. But it shouldn't be the ultimate factor outside a handful of majors. So that in mind, let's bring cost into the picture. College has never been more expensive. It's why I'm seeing more and more students look towards the UCAS system in the UK and the Canadian schools, because they're great programs and they cost a third to a fourth of US schools right now. But every year someone asks me, how do I make sure that when I go to like apply to Harvard or MIT or one of these, that I get merit aid? So that, because we're not going to qualify for financial aid. Well, you're not. You're not going to get merit aid. They're not going to give you any money. Why? Because they don't have to. They will meet 100% of the need that you show. If you fill out the FAFSA and the CSS profile, all what you can do in senior year, at that point, yeah, if they see that you need money, they'll give it. Otherwise, they are not giving a dime. So if finances are important to you and your family, don't focus on prestige. Focus a lot more on the fit and finding schools where you are above the mean grade-wise, SAT or ACT-wise, and so on. This right here is a way to learn about whether or not you might meet the need. Net price calculators are available on every school's website. They've been needed on every school's website since 2011. If you type in a school name, USC, Harvard, Washington, Seattle, whatever it may be, and type in net price calculator, something like this will pop up. Fill in your information. From there, you can see a number of schools and what you may get financially for need-based aid. At that point, if you see that all these schools are going to give you money, now you know where you fall. But if you see none of them are, you know that if you want to not pay $80,000+ a year, you shouldn't be applying to use Chicago, Northwestern, and so on. I recommend doing this as early as sophomore year because I think it's very important that this conversation happens. It's not a comfortable one. And no one wants to say to their student, we don't think it makes sense to apply that school or spend that money. I get it. But it's important that you know now so you can start to set expectations and focus on the correct aspects of the process. I do see there's a number of questions about major. I will be coming back, but I will do so after this. Okay? The last point that I will make is you'll notice I mentioned here that outside scholarships are limited. A lot of people are asked about scholarships in the chat. There's one site that if you're a sophomore, junior now, I recommend. It's called Going Mary, and I'll throw that in the chat. Going Mary, you can start an application now, and it'll show you some. Thank you, Kate. And it'll show you some that are available to you at this age. But most scholarships outside of school, like the privatized scholarships, won't be available until senior year. So my recommendation for students is from August until September, October, November, whenever we're done, your focus is on your college applications because scholarships don't matter if we don't get good applications out there. Then you have 2 to 3 months to apply for scholarships on scholarshipowl.com, capex.com, fastweb.com, and so on. There's thousands of them out there. That's when you want to start applying for those. But for now, I don't think it makes sense to focus on that. When much more importantly is you building a balanced list. I will pause there. I'm going to scroll back up. There's a lot that's been coming in. Let me see if there's any questions I missed. And Miss Heald, if there's anything you want me to address, please come off mute. We keep hearing that UMD doesn't want to admit too many MCPS students. They don't. University of Maryland has a number of counties that they want to cover across the state. Oh, and right now, Maryland doesn't have an in-state policy like other states that they have to take a certain number of students or a certain percentage, right? So they'll take about 55% of their kids from Maryland. They're going to fill the rest of the class with out of state and out of country. More money for them. So they're going to only take so many from MCPS when they have Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, so on. So that is true. And because they're getting more and more applicants, it's becoming more and more selective. How do you know which major to focus on? My kid has a particular interest in economics, but I've been told that it's a crowded field and we should not apply as an econ major. Is that right? That's hard to answer in just a generality. But one of the things to consider is the reachier your list is, the more you have to ask yourself, do I want to apply for the thing that I'm most interested in? Or do I just want to get into this school? Because there are certain strategies around that. An example would be the University of Texas. You'll know a lot of seniors who start hearing from them tonight because they're supposed to be releasing EA tonight. UT Austin has reported that their out-of-state admit rate this year is going to be around 2%. 2% for UT Austin. A number of factors go into that we don't need to talk about right now. But if you're interested in business and going to the Macomb School of Business, That's even harder to get into than the arts and sciences. So if I'm in between business and econ, I'm going econ at that school because it might give me a slight leg up because business is so competitive. Then we come over to the University of Georgia, another pretty competitive school. They don't care what major you choose. You could choose bio, business, econ. End of the day, what they care about is your grades and your test scores. So it varies by school to school. My recommendation is you go for the major you're interested in. If your narrative speaks towards that major, it makes sense to do that. If you haven't done a single philosophy class or anything philosophical, but you choose philosophy, I'm going to read right through that. Make sure that whatever major you choose, there's something about your background, course-wise, extracurricularly, that points towards that narrative. Other questions here? Sorry, there's a lot coming in here, folks. Interesting tidbit I heard on the news the other day that two majors that will be replaced by AI are graphic design and legal assistance. Right now, AI is making a big move on computer science. For the first time in the history of the School of Computer Science at UC Berkeley, one of the top comp-sci public schools in the nation, they had 1/4 of their class not have jobs coming out of graduation. First time ever. Very interesting. Will undecided major impact your acceptance into highly selective schools? At the most selective schools, undecided, no. But let's be honest, Dartmouth, UPenn, all those, they don't really offer undecided because all their students have so many interests that they're really considering. So the only school right now that I say don't go undecided to are the UCs. They don't want undecided out of state. Otherwise, if you truly are undecided, that's okay. But for example, Penn State the last 2 years, undecided has been that much harder to get into because everyone who wanted business or bio or engineering but was slightly below their mark went undecided so they could then follow that path to their ideal business bio engineering. So it is school dependent, but I don't mind undecided. Should you apply for double major ever as a freshman? It's very rare that that's even available, but if it's truly of interest, by all means. What does a good application look like? That's a whole nother conversation. I wish we could get into it tonight, but I'm happy to do that at some point. What are your thoughts about doing a year or two at community college first and transferring to a 4-year school? I love it. Why pay for 4 years if you know that end of the day you can get your general education done at MC for a tenth of the cost and then transfer to an even better school depending on where your grades are? The only difficulty with MC is it's hard for students to stay motivated if all their friends just went off to school. And two, you don't always have the most motivated people around you at MC. But if you're the sort of person who can do that, I love the idea. And that leads us perfectly into the next slide, which is what you see in front of you are where the CEOs of certain places went to college. And what you'll see on this next slide is right now, as of today, the schools ranking on how many CEOs they have in Fortune 500 companies. Yeah, UPenn's on there, as is Dartmouth, but so is Michigan State and Penn State. So is the University of Kentucky and A&M, all of which have 50+% admit rates. Does anyone know where Warren Buffett went to college? University of Nebraska. Anybody know where the CEO of General Electric went to college? Washington College, that tiny little liberal arts college I mentioned on the Eastern Shore. Yes, he went from Washington College to an MBA program at Harvard, but he started at Washington College. Prestige should not play a role here. If it does, I can't stop that. But I can tell you it won't help you build a list focused on fit. So I mentioned campus visits. I think that any time that Miss Heald and any of your CCICs host college tours at your school, you should attend them and learn about those schools. I think that you should very much focus on what it is that you want rather than the name. And students, this is your process. You take the lead. Don't wait for your parents to say, I think you should do this. You want a balanced list? You want to go to college? Take the time now to start this work. So let me share with you some of the resources I like, since that is a question that's come up. I've been rambling long enough. First off, Big Future. Big Future is College Board's college search engine. It's my 101. It's what every one of my students will start with. I'll give them a list of schools and I'll tell them go to Big Future to learn about it. Big Future is great, as is the FISC guide, FISKE. And I know for a fact that Miss Heald has a dozen of these in her office at BCC. I'm sure that other CCICs do too. So you don't even need to go buy it. You can go borrow it from school. But these are two very good resources to start learning about colleges. I also love these two sites. Both are free, Unigo and niche.com. Unigo offers current student reviews, good and bad, what they like about their school. And Niche gives you easy to follow ratings and rankings to compare schools to each other so that you can learn more about each of them in an easy to digest manner. This guide, Unigo, Niche, Big Future. Every single one of my students, juniors right now, is using those same tools. You can as well. You keep hearing me talk about a balanced college list. What you see in front of you is, to me, the perfect list. A few reaches, a couple likelies, and a number of schools that fall right in that middle category for you. I don't get to tell you what you do here, but what I can tell you is the more that cost comes into the picture, the more the safety side should be a focus. The more that prestige does, well, the answer is clear. The more the reach side should come into view. But end of the day, what you do is more important than where you go. And again, if you don't believe me, I strongly encourage you, go listen to Malcolm Gladwell's Zeitgeist and learn more about the focus on fit rather than prestige. That in mind, I've yelled at you enough. We have 15 minutes left, and I'm going to run through every question I can. For those of you who need to run, thank you for your time. For those of you who have questions, let's dig in. I'm going to scroll back up here. Test optional strategy for students applying from the classes of 26 and 27, so current juniors and sophomores. So applying, more schools may go back to test required, as has been the trend in the past year. What do you say? If you are applying to a highly selective school, like a Harvard and so on, they're going to move back to test required solely because they can't continue to get the numbers that they've been getting. The further south you look, the more that tests are going to come back because of state policies. Right now, University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, every state school in Florida, Purdue, University of Texas, Knoxville, MIT, and a bunch of the other high selectives require test scores. Then you have schools like Clemson and Auburn who don't require them. But if you look at the numbers from this year, you better believe that they're preferring them from MoCo. If you are part of the junior or sophomore class right now, you should be considering testing. Doesn't mean you have to. There'll be a number of schools that don't require it still. But given where you're applying from and the students you'll be compared to, I do recommend trying to prepare for the exam. How can you want to do pre-med but apply for English? Then how can you justify all the pre-med experience you might have gotten along the way? I'm not sure I followed the question, but there seems to be a misconception that to be pre-med, you have to be in a STEM major. A pre-med advisory is a place where students on this campus can come to get advice on what they need to do to pursue med school. Those things include strong GPA, opportunities within the pre-med realm, and the MCAT. You can get pre-med opportunities at your school as an English major. You don't need to have a bio major, do it. If you're willing to do the steps possible, you can go and work at a hospital as an English major, as an intern. They don't need to be a certain major. They just need to be willing to do the work. So if you can maintain a higher GPA, have more time because you're major to do pre-med advisory work and more time to study for the MCAT, it answers itself. How does the wanting to play a sport impact this list? It's a good question. There's a difference between you wanting and the school wanting. I hear a lot of people talking about how I might want to play, D3 coaches might be interested. If you're currently a junior and you have not yet started going through the recruitment process, you are behind. You should be in touch with coaches, emailing them, sharing your videography with them, letting them know about your grades and test scores if you had them, share with them your goals and seeing who responds. If you're a sophomore, you can't yet start talking to them, but you can start putting together the videography. That said, depending on whether it's D1 to D3, the answer changes, but sports can help immensely. You look at a small liberal arts school like Middlebury or Amherst, 1 in every 5 students who gets into those tiny little, very selected liberal arts schools is an athlete. How do you think studying abroad, such as Canada, if you're referring to going to school in Canada or the UK, I love it. It's a third to a quarter of the price, depending on the school. You get the opportunity to study in a very different place. They're great academically. Just how comfortable are you with being far from home? Is acting and theater a major to focus on? If you'd like to. I mean, think of it this way. When you graduate with an acting or theater degree, what's your goal? What do you plan to do? If what you plan to do is go and try and get on Broadway, more power to you. I tend to recommend for anyone in the performing arts, acting, so on, consider maybe getting a minor in business or economics or psychology or something of interest, just so you have that experience too. What is the definition of safety school? Great question. The definition of a safety school is a school where your GPA, your test scores, and so on are above the average. And on bigfuture.com, niche.com, those sites I mentioned, you can see what their averages are. You can see what their acceptance rate is. Generally speaking, let's use like a 3.7 unweighted GPA with decent course rigor. A safety school is a school that has 60% or more of an admit rate, maybe 50%. How do you apply for colleges abroad, specifically in the UK? It's called the UCAS system. U is an umbrella, C is in cat, A is in apple, S is in Sam. UCAS, you can type it in Google, UCAS schools, see a full list of all of them. Big fan of the UCAS system. How do you know a target school? It means that you're right in the middle, in the average of what their GPA is, test score wise, and so on. So the hard part there is, especially with state schools, you might look and go that the average at University of Tennessee, Knoxville is a 3.8. You have to remember, as an out-of-state applicant, they're going to expect you to be slightly stronger. Target schools are where a number of these state schools fall into, especially if you're out of state. Virginia Tech, NC State, USC, Clemson, so on. If you're in that like 3.6 to 3.8 range. Testing as an SAT, ACT, yes. How can you stay in contact with me? I can throw this slide back up. Where's my email? Sorry. My email address is right here for those who want to reach out. What if your state has no good universities, or are you encouraged to move out? You can't tell me a state that doesn't have good universities. Even North Dakota State University is a reputable institution, despite what people might say. So you're going to lose when you say no good universities. That said, if you don't like the universities in your state, ask yourself why. What is it that they don't offer? And consider that as a starting point. IB or AP programs, that's tough. I tend to lean IB just because of the 2-year track, and because APs, there's just such a rigmarole of the like AP environmental science, the AP physics, but both are very strong. Want to be a writer? Should I consider other options or a minor? That's up to you. I mean, I think if you're going to go into a creative writing program or English program, you're going to have time to do something else while you're in college. So I think it's worthwhile. But it's a common misconception that if I'm going to do an English major, I'm going to become an English teacher. If I'm going to do a poli-sci major, I'm going to go work on the Hill like my parents do, right? I was a poli-sci major. I'm a college counselor. What you major in college doesn't necessarily necessitate what happens after. It's the people you meet, the opportunities afforded to you. It's the networks you create. It's the internships you pursue. It's the location that it helps you settle in. There's a lot more to college than the major, which is why when we keep coming back to major, I keep trying to explain, don't focus solely on the major. Focus on where you are going, what you need to be successful, and you will inherently find other opportunities on campus that will be more important than the major. Is there somebody asked, do you have an example of a school with a low acceptance rate that doesn't have the strongest rating on niche? It's a good question. I would guess, for example, a school like Tufts might not have the best ratings for like campus or for student body. It's because some people will describe the student body as a bit stuffier, the campus is too small. The rankings on niche shouldn't be the end all be all. It's just, it's helpful for you to see how people are comparing them to each other. Because let's say you go and you visit Tulane and you love the campus and you come back and you see that the campus got a B plus, right? And then you see another school and they're like Emory and the campus got a B minus. Well, now you can start to compare the grades a little bit more from what you've seen and experienced yourself, but I wouldn't let the grades dictate a lot. If you're looking at music majors, yes, which you need to audition for, make sure that that conservatory, which is where many music majors play, has what you're seeking to do music in, whether it's vocal or winds or so on. And I'd reach out to them to see if they're in need of someone like you, similar to an athlete. To the individual who asked me a very specific question about baking versus sports media, email me. We're not going to be able to cover that right now. It's too specific, but you can email me and we can go from there. Suggested approach when the test scores are not high. I, it's very hard to answer that question. I don't know how many tests you've taken. I don't know how you prepared. I don't know whether or not you have you need extra time. My general recommendation is locally, there's a great organization called Capital Educators. Phil Pine runs it. It's a great program, good course, lots of work. I recommend that. If you're looking for something free, Khan Academy is a great resource. But here's what it comes down to. You or your student putting in a couple hours every week to prepare. Most of the time when I see students not improving, it's because they may meet with a tutor for an hour or something, but do very little outside of it. If your score is below the average, you should not submit your scores unless it's required. If you know you're already going to go to Montgomery College for 4 years, should I be researching colleges as a junior or wait until I'm in MC? I don't think there's any harm in researching colleges now, but you're not really going to know until you see what you're doing in MC. It's worth knowing what's out there though. I would 100% say it is. Is it true that universities don't want many students from the same high school? So for example, a Syracuse from the same MCPH. So yes and no. I talked to somebody at Richard Montgomery last year. 5 kids from RM got into University of Chicago. I think across some of the other high schools, like it was a total of 3, right? So generally speaking, they'll try and diversify, but it's not just about the high school, it's about the region. They'll try not to take more than a certain number from any given region. If they like 5 from the same high school, so be it. But yeah, like people like, do you know how many people from your area want to apply to Duke early decision? Duke's early decision rate is 12%. So if you know that there's at least 2 other people from your school or area who are as strong, not stronger in some capacity, you have to ask, do I take my ED shot here? Do I take it elsewhere if you're thinking about it from a strategic standpoint? Does dual enrollment through Montgomery College help? It can. It depends on the course. If you're trying to do dual enrollment math, you don't want to do IB math or AP Calc, I'd say don't do it. If the AP or IB is available at your school, go with that. If you're looking to do something like sociology, which your school may only have on level and you want the college level, then it might make sense. Fields like aerospace, does the major have more weight? Absolutely. Smaller programs and they expect very in-depth experience. They don't want theoretical anymore. They want to know that you have experience on the rocketry team, the robotics team, that you took a course over summer in that area, and that your senior year is very full of STEM heavy courses like AP Calc BC, multivariable calc if it's available, anything and everything. They're going to want great depth for engineering programs. It's one of the most popular majors right now. I advise about 12 to 13 schools, correct. All right. Just because we're starting to run up on time, do you submit IB or AP test scores to also for test needing schools? I only will send the official test scores if they're asked. So the only school right now that's requiring you to send official AP IB scores is Georgetown. Everyone else, you report your 5s and 4s for AP, 6s and 7s for IB in the application. I leave the rest off because they're not strong enough to submit. The name of the test prep contact you said to help improve your score, the one in MoCo that I really like is Capital Educators. It's run by a guy named Phil Pine.
I put that in the chat too.
Oh, perfect.
His email.
Do you advise do in-person tours for all schools you apply to? No. That's too much time and money. Unless like all the schools you're applying to are an hour from home. Like, I don't think it makes sense to go all the way to California to see the UCs. They don't look at demonstrated interest, right? So I would try and see some, especially ones that you're less certain about or in parts of the country you're less certain about if you can. But quite frankly, I only visit schools where demonstrated interest is expected, unless I just want to see some for the purpose. If I want to do pre-med, should I choose an easy major to ensure my GPA? You don't have to, but it is the path that I tend to suggest. Summer programs that you pay for a summer job. There are very few summer programs I think are worth paying for. For example, something like BU Summer Rise, where you go to Boston University for 6 to 8 weeks and you do an internship / practicum and research. That's worth it to me. Paying to do something like the pre-Brown summer program and spend $4,000 for 2 weeks on Brown's campus has no impact on whether or not Brown takes you or high selectives take you, just a pay to play. I like a summer job. If you go to high school in Maryland and live in DC, what college states are considered in-state for me, if you can prove that the majority of your time is spent at a high school in Maryland, they may be willing to give you in-state, but they're going to ask you a lot of questions. If your parents pay taxes and everything else in DC, it's a bit harder to get. Our average test scores currently published by schools inflated. They are a bit because students are only applying with the score they need to get in the 50th percentile or higher. If they don't have it, they don't apply. But generally speaking, especially with some of these schools that we're talking about, if you're not within 10 to 20 points of it, I wouldn't of the average, I probably still wouldn't submit. Okay. We are running out on time here, so I'm going to take two more. How do you know that demonstrated interest is required for the school in order to get in? Type into Google tonight, colleges that track demonstrated interest. 7 different sites will pop up. Any one of them you can use, but you can filter to see who considers it, who doesn't consider it, and so on. It's a good question. And to the student, the last one I'll address, because I think it's a very important question. Are there good universities for people who don't have much money? Yes, there absolutely are. And remember, if you're in that position, when your student is a senior, you're going to want to fill out the FAFSA, FAFSA. And if your student's applying to any private schools, the CSS profile. By doing that, you will show colleges what your income is, assets, so on. And at that point, that is when they start to roll out money to make sure that you can afford college. That in mind, you're very welcome. I'm glad this was helpful. Folks, again, my email is jordank@collegewise.com. If you have any questions, please let me know. Ms. Heald and I will be hosting a number of these webinars and seminars throughout the months to come. So I hope to see you all again soon. Be well, take care, stay warm, and Happy New Year.